Truck driver finds shivering little girl on highway. Her confession makes him call 911 immediately. The bitter winter evening stretched across an endless expanse of farmland, with snow falling steadily from a steel-gray sky. It gathered on the shoulders of the empty highway, creating a stark white contrast against the dark asphalt. Orson's refrigerated truck cut through the desolate landscape, its engine humming steadily against the growing storm. The dashboard displayed the temperature dropping steadily below -10 degrees Celsius. Orson had been driving for hours, his eyes locked on the seemingly endless road ahead. The monotony of the journey was interrupted when his phone vibrated in the cup holder. His boss's name flashed on the screen, causing a knot to form in his stomach. A call from the boss rarely brought good news, especially on a night like this. With a deep sigh, Orson answered the call, already anticipating the demands. His boss's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and impatient. "Orson, we've got 2 urgent deliveries in that cargo you're hauling. I need you to step on it. Drive faster." Orson's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he listened to the details. First, there was a shipment of fresh produce for the distributors. Nothing unusual. But then came the kicker: wedding flowers, specially requested by the boss's best friend. His boss emphasized repeatedly that the flowers could not be late. "I don't care if you have to drive through a blizzard, Orson. Those flowers need to get there on time. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Orson replied, his voice flat, resigned. "I'll make sure it gets done." As the call ended, Orson's thoughts turned dark. The hum of the engine filled the cab, and his voice spilled out, ranting to himself. Years of bitterness flooded his mind. 15 years of this. "Am I the stupidest man alive?" he muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "Lost my family, my marriage, all to be at the beck and call of a man who couldn't care less about me." He imagined growing old alone, dying in this very truck with no one to notice or care. The thought of how quickly his boss would replace him if illness or injury ever prevented him from driving sent a chill through him, one that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "Just another disposable part in the machine," he growled, his words barely audible over the hum of the engine. The gas indicator blinked on, its red glow adding to his frustration. "Perfect. Just perfect," he muttered, calculating the 20-minute drive to the next station. The farmland stretched endlessly on either side, the wind picking up speed across the open field. Orson settled in for the drive, his mood as dark as the storm clouds gathering overhead. As Orson continued down the highway, the snow began falling more heavily, reducing visibility with every minute. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield as the wipers worked overtime to clear the accumulating snow. Suddenly, through the thickening white curtain, Orson caught a glimpse of something out of place, a splash of pink against the white landscape. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, a result of the monotony of the drive. But as he drew closer, the pink blur began to take shape. To his disbelief, Orson saw the figure of a young girl, no older than 13, wearing only a thin pink dress that barely reached her knees. She was waving frantically, her entire body trembling violently in the brutal cold. The sight was so out of place against the desolate winter landscape that for a moment, Orson wondered if he was hallucinating. As the truck neared, Orson's foot hovered over the brake pedal. Multiple thoughts raced through his mind, creating a cacophony of conflicting voices. His boss's urgent demands echoed in his ears, reminding him of the tight deadline he was already struggling to meet. Years of experience screamed caution. She could be bait for a trap, a scam, or worse. The cargo deadline loomed large in his mind, a constant pressure pushing him forward. "Can't get involved," he muttered, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. "Not my problem. Need to make that delivery." Even as he spoke the words, a part of him rebelled against the coldness of the decision, but the pragmatic part of him, the part that had kept him employed for 15 years, won out. Instead of slowing down, Orson pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to drown out his conscience. He turned the radio volume up, filling the cab with the sounds of an old country song. The singer's twangy voice sang about lost love and loneliness, almost a fitting soundtrack to the moment. As he passed the girl, Orson glanced in his rearview mirror. Her small figure grew smaller, but the image burned itself into his mind. Her desperate wave, the thin pink dress whipping in the wind, her body visibly trembling in the cold. He tried to shake off the guilt that was already gnawing at him, focusing instead on the road ahead, on the job he had to do. But even as the miles stretched between him and the girl in pink, Orson couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. The image of her desperate face haunted him, a silent accusation that no amount of radio noise could drown out. After a half-hour that felt much longer, the petrol station appeared through the snow, like a fluorescent oasis. The harsh lights cut through the falling snow, creating a hazy glow that seemed almost otherworldly in the whiteout conditions. Orson felt a wave of relief as he pulled up to the pump. The familiar routine offered a welcome distraction from his troubled thoughts. As he filled the tank, the cold bit at his exposed skin. Once the tank was full, he closed the petrol cap and made his way inside. The warmth hit him as soon as he opened the door, a sharp contrast to the frigid air outside. He headed straight for the restroom, eager to splash some cold water on his face and clear his head. As he pushed open the restroom door, he heard two men's voices inside. He was about to turn back when a fragment of their conversation caught his attention. "Did you see that girl in the pink dress standing by the road?" one man asked. "Yeah, strange sight," the other replied. "Especially in this weather." Orson froze, his hand still on the door handle, and listened intently. "You didn't stop, did you?" the first man asked. "Nah," came the reply. "Weather's troubling enough without picking up strays. Probably just gonna bring more trouble." The first man chuckled. "Smart move. For all we know, she could be some kind of lure. You hear the stories. Country clubs or worse, a scam." Orson's stomach churned at their callous words. He wanted to burst in and confront them about their indifference, but before he could act, their conversation shifted to other topics. He heard them washing their hands quickly. The two men exited the restroom, barely sparing him a glance. Once they were gone, Orson entered the restroom and splashed cold water on his face. But it did little to wash away the discomfort he felt as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. He was troubled by how easily those men had dismissed a child in need. But then, a more uncomfortable thought struck him. The way the girl seemed to shrink into herself at his touch. Her body language spoke volumes, contradicting Tom's friendly demeanor and casual explanations. Orson watched as Tom forced Belle to return his jacket and thermos, his grip on her arm never loosening. The explanation about her wandering off to look for white bunnies felt hollow, especially considering the terror Orson had seen in her eyes earlier as they disappeared into the swirling snow. Orson couldn't shake the feeling that something deeply wrong had just unfolded. The image of Belle's frightened face stayed with him as he climbed back into his truck, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts and growing concern. As Aeon started driving again, his mind became a whirlwind of worry and indecision. He barely went a mile when his phone rang, the sound cutting through the tense silence of the cab. His boss's name flashed on the screen and his stomach dropped. With a deep breath, he answered the call. "Hello, sir," Orson said. His boss's voice came through sharply, filled with anger. "Aeon, what the hell is going on? I've been tracking the truck's GPS. Why did you backtrack after the gas station? You're already behind schedule." Orson winced at the fury in his boss's tone. He opened his mouth to explain the situation with Belle, but his boss cut him off before he could speak. "I don't want to hear excuses," the man snapped. "You cannot be late to deliver those flowers. The distributor's been calling non-stop about the produce. Do you have any idea how much money we stand to lose if you don't make these deliveries on time?" "I understand, sir, but there was a situation," Orson began. "I don't care about situations, Orson," his boss barked. "I care about result. Do you know why you're my most reliable man? It's because you have no family responsibilities. That's what makes you always available and quick. I don't need you dealing with other people's business. It's not good news to me. I don't want any more interruptions after this. Is that clear?" Orson's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to respond calmly. "Yes, sir. It's clear." "Good. Now get moving. I expect those deliveries on time." The call ended abruptly, leaving Orson in stunned silence as he continued driving alone in the truck. His mind was filled with memories he'd rather forget. His time as a driver for a drug cartel, the constant fear, the moral compromises, and the police sting that led to his arrest. He thought about losing his family during his imprisonment. His daughter lost to divorce, his ex-wife who couldn't handle his chosen profession. 15 years of trying to live an honest life, redeeming himself through legitimate work, all hanging by a thread because of one act of compassion. The irony wasn't lost on Orson. The very qualities that made him valuable to his boss were a result of his past mistakes and losses. As the miles rolled by, Orson found himself at a crossroads. One path, the path of least resistance, was to follow orders, make the delivery, and keep his job. The other, though, was the nagging sense that something was deeply wrong back at that farm, that Belle needed help. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, heavier than any cargo he'd ever hauled. With each passing mile, the image of Belle's frightened face grew more vivid in his mind, haunting him with the possibility that he might be leaving her to a terrible fate. Finally, unable to bear the guilt any longer, Orson made a decision that he knew might cost him everything. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, the engine idling as he sat in silence for a moment, gathering his resolve. Then, with a deep breath, he put the truck in gear and made a U-turn, heading back toward the farm. Whatever consequences he might face, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he didn't at least try to help. Despite the deteriorating weather conditions, thick fog limiting visibility and ice making the road treacherous, Orson couldn't shake his unease. The image of Belle's frightened face haunted him, overriding his boss's angry words and the potential consequences of his actions. The journey back to the farm seemed to take an eternity. The weather worsened, thick fog limiting visibility to mere feet in front of the truck, and ice made the road treacherous. Orson gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension, as he navigated the dangerous conditions. As he neared the farm, Orson couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, a truck driver with a criminal past, potentially throwing away his job and his shot at redemption, all for a girl he'd met briefly on the side of the road. And yet, something in his gut told him he was doing the right thing. Finally, the vague outline of the farmhouse appeared through the swirling snow. Orson parked his truck a short distance away, not wanting to alert anyone to his presence. He took a moment to check on his cargo, ensuring the refrigeration unit was still running to keep the flowers fresh and the produce from spoiling. Then, steeling himself for whatever might come next, he set out toward the farm. The farmhouse loomed dark and silent in the storm, a foreboding silhouette against the white landscape. Orson's knocking went unanswered. The windows were dark and lifeless. He looked around, seeing no signs of life or movement. The eerie silence was broken only by the howling wind, which sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Where are they?" he muttered. "Surely there should be someone here, at least the farmer." Just as he was about to give up and return to his truck, a faint sound caught his attention. It was coming from a large structure off to the side of the main house, a chicken coop as big as a small warehouse. Orson approached cautiously, the sound growing clearer as he drew near. It was unmistakable now. Someone was crying out for help. Orson tried the main door of the warehouse, but it was locked tight. Undeterred, he circled the building, searching for another way in. At the back, he found a door that yielded to his push, swinging open with a rusty creak. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit and filled with the rustling and clucking of hundreds of chickens. Orson made his way down the rows of cages, following the sound of distress. What he found made his blood run cold. In one of the cages, huddled in a corner, was a black woman, Her clothes were torn and dirty, and there was the unmistakable stench of urine. When she saw Orson, her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "please help me." Orson didn't hesitate. He looked around frantically for something to break the lock with, finally spotting a rusted metal beam in one corner of the coop. He grabbed it and returned to the cage, using all his strength to smash the lock. It took several attempts, but finally, the lock gave way with a satisfying crack. As the woman crawled out of the cage, she broke down in tears. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much." "It's okay," Orson said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the horror of the situation. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" "Mira," she replied, her voice shaking. "My name is Mira. My daughters, my 2 little girls, my husband took them." "Your husband?" Orson asked, picturing the man in his mind. "Is his name Tom?" "Yes," Mira said. "He's my new husband. We've only been married a month. He seemed so kind at first, offering to help run the farm after my late husband died. But then he changed. He took over everything, the farm, our lives." She looked at him. "Have you met my husband, sir? You seem to know him." Orson thought about his words. How could he tell this woman about the girl in the pink dress? "Well, I'm a truck driver," he said. "I was just passing the highway when I saw a young girl in a pink dress. Long story short, I stopped by and checked on her. Then Tom, your husband, approached us." "Grace, did she escape?" Mira asked. "Escape?" Orson echoed. "Is that what you think? I found her on the roadside and Tom, your husband, took her back to the house." Orson's mind reeled at the revelation. "But the house was dark and locked when I checked earlier," he said. "Do you know where they might be?" Myra's eyes widened with fear. "The barn," she whispered. "He must have taken them to the barn. We have to help them, but we need to be quiet. Tom, he's dangerous when he's angry." As they made their way out of the coop, Orson couldn't help but ask, "Why didn't you call the police before now?" Myra's face crumpled with shame and fear. "I was scared," she confessed. "Tom, he has this way of making you believe things will get better. He kept promising he'd change if I just gave him more time. He's not always like that. We have good days too, sometimes. But when things got bad, I was terrified of what he might do to the girls if I tried to get help. A part of me still hoped he could change." Orson shook his head, his expression grim. "Mira, I've worked with the worst of men in the past. I've seen what they're capable of," he said, his voice hinting at his time in the drug cartel. "What Tom's doing, it's too far gone. When a man has sunk this deep into darkness, he rarely, if ever, changes." Mira looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning realization. "You sound like you know from experience." Orson nodded slowly. "I do. And trust me, waiting for someone like that to change is like waiting for the sun to rise at midnight. It's not going to happen. We need to get your girl out of there now." "But what if?" Mira started. Orson cut her off gently. "No what ifs," he said firmly. "Your daughters need you to be strong right now. We have to focus on getting them to safety. Can you do that?" Mira took a deep breath, then nodded. Her resolve visibly strengthened. Yes, I can. You're right. No more waiting. We need to save my girls." "That's the spirit," Orson said, offering a reassuring smile. "Now let's go. Show me where the barn is, and we'll figure out how to get them out together." They left the chicken warehouse, stepping out into the cold night. Mira led the way, guiding Orson toward the barn. They moved cautiously, ducking behind barrels and crates, each step filled with the fear of being discovered should Tom happen to walk by. As they neared the barn, a sound cut through the howling wind, the unmistakable sound of children crying. Orson and Mira exchanged a look of determination. Whatever happened next, they knew they had to act fast to save the girls. "Tom," he said, keeping his voice steady, "you're right, I don't know what you want. Why don't you tell me? Maybe we can work something out?" For a brief moment, it seemed like Tom might be considering Orson's words. But then his face twisted with rage. No, he shouted. No more talking. You'll all do what I say, or I. He never got to finish his threat. In that split second of distraction, Orson lunged forward, tackling Tom to the ground. The pitchfork clattered away as they wrestled on the dirt-covered barn floor. Tom fought like a man possessed, his fists landing with brutal force against Orson's face and body. But Orson had size and desperation on his side. He used all his strength to pin Tom down, refusing to let him go. "Mira!" Orson shouted. "Get the girls and run. Call the police." Mira didn't hesitate. She rushed to Belle, helping her to her feet, then frantically worked to free Haley from her chains. But the lock wouldn't budge. "I'm so sorry, darling. I'll come back for you, I promise." Tears welled in her eyes as she made her escape through the side door. Grace clung to her mother, sobbing with relief and fear as Mira led them out of the barn. Orson continued to struggle with Tom, the fight feeling like it lasted an eternity. Each man gave everything he had. Orson could taste blood in his mouth and feel the bruises forming on his body, but he refused to let go. Finally, after what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the cold air. Tom's frantic movements slowed, but Orson held on, knowing help was near. The barn door burst open, and suddenly, the space was filled with shouting police officers. Orson felt Tom being pulled from him, heard the click of handcuffs, and lay on the barn floor, gasping for breath. He watched as Tom was led away, still shouting and struggling. A paramedic knelt beside Orson, checking him for injuries. "You're a brave man," the paramedic said, helping him sit up. "Foolish, maybe." Orson managed a weak smile, wincing from the pain in his ribs. "But brave." "Sometimes," Orson said, wincing, "you've got to be a little foolish to do the right thing." As he was helped out of the barn, Orson saw Mira and the girls huddled together in blankets. When Belle saw him, she broke free from her mother and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for coming back." Orson patted her gently on the head, feeling a lump form in his throat. "You're welcome, kiddo," he said softly. "You're safe now. It's all over." As the police and paramedics took over the farm, Orson sat in the back of an ambulance, wincing as the paramedic cleaned cuts on his face. His body ached from the fight, but the pain felt distant, overshadowed by the relief that Mira and her daughters were safe. When the paramedic finished bandaging a nasty cut on his forehead, Orson saw Mira approaching, her face tear-stained but filled with gratitude and concern. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Orson smiled faintly. "I've been better," he admitted, "but I'll live." "How are the girls?" "They're shaken up, but they'll be okay," Mira said. "The paramedics are checking them now." "I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You risked everything to help us?" Orson shook his head. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad I could help." Mira reached out, taking his hand in both of hers. "Please stay with us tonight," she said. "It's the least we can do. You shouldn't be alone after everything that happened." For a moment, Orson was tempted. The idea of a warm bed and a home-cooked meal was appealing, especially after the chaos of the night. But reality set in. He thought about his truck, the deliveries waiting for him. "I appreciate the offer," he said gently, "but I have to decline. I'm a truck driver, and I've got deliveries to make. People are counting on me." Mira nodded, understanding but clearly disappointed. "Will you at least come back to visit? The girls would love to see you again and thank you properly once all this is settled down." Orson smiled. "I'd like that. I take this route regularly, so I'll make sure to stop by next time I'm passing through." As Mira turned to go back to the girls, Orson's gaze landed on Belle. Wrapped in a blanket, she was being examined by a paramedic in the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles. For the first time, Orson got a clear look at her face, and understanding hit him like a punch. Belle's resemblance to his own daughter was striking. They were about the same age, with dark eyes and similar skin tone. It explained the inexplicable pull he had felt to help her on the road. It was a brief, powerful moment, bringing a lump to Orson's throat. Belle caught his eye and gave him a small smile. It was a far cry from the terrified girl he had met on the road. Her eyes now showed trust instead of fear. She mouthed a silent thank you before being led away by the paramedics. As Orson watched her go, a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Whatever consequences he faced for his actions that night, he knew he had done the right thing. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond just making deliveries. A police officer approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. Orson, we need to take your statement now, if you're feeling up to it." Orson nodded, steeling himself for the long night ahead. He knew there would be questions to answer, explanations to give. But he was ready to face whatever came next. He had found something tonight that he thought he'd lost long ago, a sense of doing what was right, no matter the cost. As he began recounting the events of the night, Orson couldn't help but feel that, maybe, just maybe, this was the start of a new chapter in his life. One where he could finally make amends for his past and build a future he could be proud of. As the commotion at the farm began to die down and the police officers took charge of the investigation, Orson made his way back to his truck. The familiar sight of the big rig, parked just as it had been before, oddly comforting after the chaos of the night. When he neared the truck, he was startled to see a familiar car parked behind it. The snowstorm had calmed, revealing a landscape bathed in the soft light of dawn. Standing next to the car was his boss. Orson's heart sank. He had been bracing himself for an angry phone call, but a face-to-face confrontation was something else entirely. He approached cautiously, ready for the worst. "Sir," Orson began, voice hesitant. "I can explain." His boss held up a hand, cutting him off. "I drove all the way out here because your truck's been parked for over 3 hours, according to the GPS tracker. Couldn't reach you on the phone, so I had to see for myself what was going on." The man's face was unreadable, his tone neutral. Orson took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, sir. There was a girl on the roadside, and I had to help." His boss interrupted him. "Figured as much. You must have gotten caught up in whatever's going on at that farm." He gestured toward the flashing lights in the distance. Orson opened his mouth to explain further, but his boss shook his head. "Save the full story for later. I'll probably end up reading about it in the news." There was a long silence. Orson stood there, waiting for the axe to fall, expecting to be fired on the spot. But then, something unexpected happened. His boss's stern expression softened slightly, and he let out a long sigh. "Look, Orson," his boss said, "I'm not going to pretend I'm happy about this. The wedding flowers are late, the distributors are calling for discounts because of the delay. It's a loss for the business." Orson nodded, steeling himself. He was ready for the worst. But his boss wasn't finished. "That being said," he continued, "I can't say I'm not proud of what you did. Whatever happened over there, sounds like you showed some real bravery. That counts for something in my book." Orson blinked in surprise. "Sir." His boss held up a finger. "Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to condone this behavior, just this once. But there can't be any repetition, you understand? Otherwise, you might as well hang up your keys and become a farmer yourself." A small smile tugged at the corner of Orson's mouth. "Understood, sir. I've been driving for you for 15 years, and I've never been late before." "Let's keep it that way," his boss replied. "Or better yet, the only time ever." He glanced at his watch. "Now the weather's cleared up. Think you can make up for lost time?" Orson nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Yes, sir. I'll get those deliveries made as fast as I safely can." His boss clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I like to hear. Get going, then." Orson nodded. "Yes, sir. Good job tonight. Just don't make a habit of it, all right?" With that, his boss turned and walked back to his car. Orson watched him drive away, still hardly believing what had just happened. He had prepared to lose everything, and instead, he had found understanding in the most unexpected place. Shaking his head in wonder, Orson climbed into his truck. The familiar rumble of the engine was comforting, grounding him after the surreal events of the night. He adjusted his mirrors and caught a final glimpse of the farm in the distance. Mira and the girls were still there, huddled together, watching him. Orson raised a hand in farewell, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the truck's heater. Whatever came next, he knew he had done something good tonight, something that mattered. As he pulled onto the road, Orson turned up the volume on the radio. An old country song filled the cab, singing about second chances and unexpected blessings. It seemed fitting. The open road stretched before him, bathed in the golden light of a new day. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white snow. As Orson drove into the dawn, he felt, for the first time in a very long time, a sense of hope for the future. He had faced his fears, done what was right, and somehow, against all odds, come out the other side still standing. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. But for now, Orson was content to drive, the rhythm of the road beneath his wheels reminding him that every journey, no matter how difficult, has its purpose. And as the miles rolled by, Orson couldn't help but smile. He had set out to make a delivery, but in the end, he had delivered something far more valuable than flowers or produce. He had delivered hope, safety, and a chance at a new beginning for Mira and her daughters. And maybe, just maybe, he had delivered a new beginning for himself as well. With that thought warming his heart, Orson pressed down on the accelerator, ready to make up for lost time. The deliveries were waiting, and beyond them, a future full of possibilities. Whatever came next, Orson was ready to face it head-on, with the same courage and determination that had seen him through the night.